Hello and welcome to the Chandler Southern Baptist Church YouTube channel. This week we feature our guest speaker, Duwayne Colvin. Duwayne retired from his position as the Director of Missions of the North Canadian Baptist Association near Henrietta, Oklahoma. He now lives in Shawnee with his wife, Greta. Duwayne and Greta have been great friends with our pastor and his wife for many years. In this episode, Duwayne shares his powerful and moving testimony of how God has worked in his life. Please enjoy this week's episode featuring Duwayne Colvin.
My name is Duwayne. I'm going to be your guest speaker this morning, and I'm delighted to be here. My wife, Greta, is here behind these folks, and I heard a preacher say one time that he would get up and he would put a breath saver in his mouth, and when that breath saver was gone, it's time for him to shut her down. But one morning he got up to preach, and he popped that thing in his mouth, and it was a button. So let me save you a lot of problem this morning. I will try to do what God's laid on my heart, and sometimes I don't always do what I have prepared. I've got a testimony about my life I would like to share with you, and it's not often that God will give me the freedom to do that. But as I walk through the building, visiting with different ones, y'all just folks, right? You just folks, and we're all just folks. So the Bible says, and I'll get there with you here in a moment, it's chapter 12 of the book of Luke. Jesus said, "And I say unto you," verse 4, "And I say unto you, don't be afraid of them that kill the body, and after that have no more than they can do. But I will forewarn you whom you shall fear. Fear him which after he has killed, he has the power to cast into hell. Yea, I say unto you, fear him." Many places in the New Testament, when the word fear comes up, it is have a reverence for God. Reverence for God. But in this particular instant, every time that the word fear is mentioned in this verse, it means have fear of him. We're living in a world today, there's no fear of God, because people don't believe there is God. And so they can do what they want to, go where they want to, do all the things that the world is doing, and be just fine, because their vision of God is that all the good I do and all the bad I do in my life, if the good outweighs the bad, then I'm going to get to go to heaven. That's a lie straight from the pits of hell. It depends on what you do with Jesus Christ. And when you hear the message of Jesus Christ and you ignore it, or you procrastinate for a period of time, you may not make it to heaven, because you may not live long enough to get to the end of your procrastination. So this morning, as every morning, if God is speaking to your heart, and He uses my testimony, my story, to share with folks, because it seemed like everything in my life will go in parallel with parts of other people's life. But I want you to know what God can do in your life, because He did it in my life. It's a miracle what took place in my life. When I was just small, 4 years old, we'd moved from Chickasha, Oklahoma to California, and they determined that I had tuberculosis. Back in 1952, there wasn't many people survived tuberculosis. Not many. I survived it. Why did I survive it? Well, I tell you what, I had a great-grandma Brown, the only one in the family that had a reverence for God. Every time the church door was open, she was down there loving to worship with God's people, and that's a good place to be. She'd take me down there with her once in a while, but the main thing was that she would, if I may lay that there, I'm not trying to, she would take me with her to church, but more important than that, she would set me on her knee, it seemed like every evening, and she would pray with me. She'd read that Bible and she would pray. Can I tell you what I believe she prayed? I believe she was praying this prayer: God, this child's life is in danger. He's not going to live unless you do something. So do something with this boy. Do something with this baby, and then use his life for your honor and your glory. Took a long time to get there. Grandma Brown died, and living with my mother, of course, and my mother was married several times. And I'm going to cut to the chase, because when I was 12 years old, I had never been to a school for one full year in a row. Because at 12 years old, my mother had been married 5 times. And every time she would get a divorce, we'd go back to Grandma's house. That was home base. I was sharing with my wife this morning and a memory that I had of my mother. She was between her 5th and 6th husband, and I was about 11, 12 years old and had a brother 3 years elder and one 6 years younger than I. And she started taking us to a church down the street. And we went down there several Sundays in a row. It was a non-denominational church. I'm not going to tell you the name of it because I don't want to bash any church. It was a neat thing because I was out playing across the street and I noticed the preacher's car pulled up in front of the house. Man, I hightailed it to the house, you know. Hey, when the preacher comes, that's a big deal, amen? Some preachers don't go there. We should. So I hightailed it to the house, and there was a preacher and one of the leading men in the church. And this is what they said. The preacher said to my mom, you know, we're a church down there of people, and been kind of talk going around about you. We understand you've been married 5 times. Mom nodded her head, and he said, well, we would rather you didn't come back to church. Seemed to be a blemish upon the church. Now, those boys are going to have to pay for that one day. They'll have to pay for that one day. I don't think they ever read the story about the woman who had 5 husbands or the woman who was caught in adultery. Jesus didn't turn them away. He said, come on to me. I'm going to shed my blood on the cross, and it's going to be for you too. Nobody exempt. Well, as time went on, I got to where I wouldn't go to school. I just didn't like school. And I was in the 8th grade, 9th grade. And my mom said, Duwayne, what do I have to do to get you to go to school? And I said, well, if you'll let me go and live with my Uncle Willard in that school district, I'll go to school, because there was this little 5'3" 3/4" green-eyed girl. And first time I saw her, I said, hubba, hubba. I nudged my buddy. I said, I got to have that woman. And so I told her I'd go to school. Well, that was a good thing to tell her, but I moved in with Willard, my Uncle Willard. He was my mother's brother, just younger than she. He'd been a boxer, a professional boxer. And he was mean. He had no conscience, I'm telling you. This guy had no conscience. And I'm saying the truth. Well, I didn't do what I told Mom I'd do. Got over there, and Jimmy Green was there, and we started cutting school together and cutting school. And it was always in my mind and in the seat of my britches that if Uncle Willard found out, I was going to get nailed pretty hard. And sure enough, one night, the bedroom door opened. My Uncle Willard was standing there. He said, Duwayne, get up, come in here, put your trousers on, come in here. I need to tell you something. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've been caught. I got up, put on my pants, and walked through the hall into the living room. And when I got to the living room, his back was to me, and he turned around and looked at me. And this man of a man had tears running out of his eyes and dripping off. And he said, I need to tell you. He said, tonight, your mom and Joe, her 7th husband, was in a car wreck, and both of them were killed immediately. That hurt so bad. It hurt so bad. I remember the funeral. See, the problem was my mom and my stepdad loved to drink. They loved their alcohol. And they would go out and party and drink and run. They'd been over at my Uncle Ray's house, and some people from Oklahoma had come in, was living in California, had come in, and they went to visit with them. When my family got together, what they would do is they would drink beer in the house. The men would go out the back door to the car and take a hit of whiskey and go back in. They were playing cards, playing dominoes, carrying on like they always did. My mom and my stepdad got in a big argument, big fight. Two of my uncles was wanting to whip my stepdad, and so my mom was inside, and stepdad pulled up, had left, and he come back, and he told my younger brother, "Go get your mom, let's go home." So my younger brother, 6 years younger than I, he was 9, went to the house, talked mom into getting in the car and going home. They were still mad, fighting, yelling at each other, according to my little brother. The car veered off into the median and hit a tree about that big around, right dead in the middle. And my mom and my stepdad were hurled out into eternity. And as far as I know, without Christ. No regard for God whatsoever. And if they did have it, we're going to get our lives right later. We're going to wait later to do it. Later is not promised. Only today is the day of salvation. The Bible said, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. So, went to the funeral. The caskets were closed because they were damaged. The bodies were damaged beyond recognition. One over here, one over there. Both of them had a flag draped over it. My stepdad was Navy. I was up in the choir loft, and that preacher started preaching. He had 2 subjects. One was heaven and one was hell. And he said, God has chosen you to be in heaven, not hell. See, hell is prepared for the devil and his angels, not us. But he said, and I just closed my eyes and bowed my head. I just didn't want to hear him. If I'd had something to put in my ears, I would have. But he preached about that, and all I could think of when I would glimpse over here and over there at those 2 caskets was there are 2 souls hurled out into eternity to a place called hell, like that preacher's talking about. Went back, stayed with my Uncle Willard. He said, you can stay here with us. At the house, I wasn't a very good kid. I got to admit, I was rotten to the core. My Uncle Willard came in from work one day about 6 weeks after my mom had died, and he said, Duwayne, you have a suitcase in there? And I said, yes, sir. He said, go put your stuff in it. And I went out there and put all my stuff in it. Walked in the living room, and he said, where's the suitcase? I said, it's in bed. You go get it. And I went and got it, walked out into the living room. He said, you see that blankety-blank door? You get out it, and don't you ever come back. 6 weeks after my mom died, I was put out into the street. I stayed with my aunt and stayed with another uncle. My grandma got a place to live, and so moved in with her, and I was there for a while, and that's pretty cool because it wasn't far down the road there, that little green-eyed girl I was telling you about. We've been going steady since we was 12. One day I came in, Brother Ed, and my grandma said, Duwayne, I'm I'm going to have to close this house down. I'm going to move up there with my boyfriend, Slick. And there's no room for you. And I was out at the age of 15 years old. But just previous to that, my dad showed up. You know, I'd never seen my dad. I'd just heard about him. He shows up and came in with his wife and 4 kids that he had with her and sat down and said, you know, when Johnny Mae and I were having problems down towards the end, she was running around with a guy that looked a lot like me. Johnny Mae's my mother. He said, now Glenn, my brother, elder 3 years, said, Glenn, I believe, is my son. But this one, Duwayne's not my boy. He's not my son. It seemed like everything just coming in on me. But God had a plan. God had a plan. God's always got a plan. Well, that little green-eyed girl and myself made a big mistake. We decided at the age of 15 we could have a sexual relationship, and that's bad. I know it now. I probably knew it then. And she got pregnant with our son. Her mom and dad said, well, we're going to let you kids get married after the baby comes. If, Duwayne, you have a steady job, you have transportation, you have a place for them to live, you have the doctor paid for, and you have the hospital paid for. I had 6 months to get her done. I'll tell you, I buckled down. If Mom ever taught me anything, it was responsibility, take it on, head on, and get her done. I started working and trading stuff, and lo and behold, the day my son born, went to the hospital, and her mom and dad was there. We're looking at that baby through that glass. That's whenever we could be safe, you know. Didn't have to be in there when they were having the baby and all that like you do today. I feel for you guys. You know, at that moment, that woman don't like you at all. That's right. Some of them have even been known to call their husband names because he put them there. I missed all that, but we left the hospital that day. You couldn't see her. You couldn't touch the baby, nothing. So we walked down to the parking lot, and there was her dad and mom with me. Got down to where the car was, and I said, well, when do you think we can get married? I said, I've got a 57 Harley Davidson. I got a 51 Mercury. I have a steady job. I have money to get the house set up. Oh, and by the way, the doctor and the hospital's all been paid. 6 months. God had a plan. God always has a plan. So, her mom looked up at me and said, well, we've decided we're not going to let you kids get married. I don't know which one hurt the most, when my daddy said I wasn't his, or when they said I couldn't be a daddy to my son. I said, why not? You know what her response was? Because you are a horse trader. I didn't know that was a bad thing. Look what I accomplished in 6 months. I didn't steal nothing. I didn't rob anybody. I traded and I worked and I got things together, and that'd like to kill me. In fact, I got in my 51 Mercury and drove through town, and I was weeping so hard that the lights was just running. You know how they'll do. And that night, the only night of my life, I thought about killing myself. Suicide's too easy of a word. I felt like killing myself. But you know what kept me from doing that? It came to my mind, you was raised without a daddy. And when you finally saw him, he disowned you. But my son is going to have a daddy. And I'm going to take care of him and raise him. Well, my son just turned 58 the other day. I know I don't look that old. I kind of feel like it, but I don't look it. So it was a few weeks after that, they got tired of seeing me laying in the floor watching TV and carrying on every night at my late wife's house. And one night I went over there, and my wife said, my girlfriend at the time, she said, you know what? She said, Daddy told Mama, I like a man that Daddy tells. Mama is the head of the house. To go and sign the papers for y'all to get married. That next morning, we was in the car headed over to Riverside. Had my grandma with me. She was supposed to be my caretaker or whatever, but she was with me, and she signed for me, and her mama signed for her. I paid an extra $3 to get the blood test that day. Otherwise, we had to wait 3 days. We got that blood test back. Everything was good. We called her mama and called my grandma and said, we're getting married at 3 o'clock. Y'all want to come to the wedding? Come on. Who could I trust? I couldn't trust anyone. I've been programmed not to trust. So we got married, and I was 16 in May, and she was 16 in September, on the very day my son was born. And in October, we got married and started our life together. Wasn't long till that kind of had problems, because in California back then, they had some stuff come in called drugs. Started smoking a little weed, taking a few pills. Next thing I know, I'm dropping psychedelics, LSD. Mainlining some things, dealing, drugs, jars of pills, and hurt me. And I decided to steal some drugs from one of the main dealers in the area. He was a big guy. I don't want to use that word, big guy, but he was the big guy in that day. He found out we got him. Junkie. Associated with junkies. He dealt a lot of LSD and drugs, but mostly it was heroin, cocaine. Came to the house one night, captured my brother-in-law, put him in the back seat of the car with a gun. Terry had him down, sent the guy to the door. He come to the door and came in, and he had a pistol, looked like it was about that long, but it's really just a pistol. And he put that pistol right in my chest. He said, Duwayne, Terry wants his drugs. I said, Terry's got his drugs. So I went out and got them, give them to him, and away they went. But the next day, I get a phone call from Terry. Terry said, Duwayne, need to talk to you. Come on over to the house. And I thought, oh, my goodness. Went over to his house, and he said, you know, bad thing you did. I said, I understand that. He said, I'm going to give you 2 weeks to get out of town, and then I'm going to put the papers out on you. That's a $500 back then. You could have anybody erased, killed. I said, Terry, if you give me 3 weeks, I'll get plumb out of the state. He said, you got it. 3 weeks to the day. Had my car loaded, had the trailer loaded, had my wife, my 2 children in the car. My son was 5, my daughter was 1, and we headed out for Oklahoma because most of my family was coming back to Oklahoma anyway. My aunts and uncles, everybody was coming back. So it's a natural thing we'd come back here. we got back here, my wife started going to church, and I kept going to the bars, drinking. I'd already made drug connection, fighting. We moved up to Davis, Oklahoma, a few months, doing the same things. There was 5 bars around Davis and Sulphur that wouldn't let me in. I don't look mean, but I'm mean. Got a carnal nature somewhere in there. He comes up every once in a while, but back then he was in total control, that carnal nature. My wife started going to church up there at Davis, and the mailman had invited her to go to church. So she started taking the kids on Sunday morning. I did my thing as a daddy. I stayed home and cleaned the house, had lunch ready for them to come. I mean, I'm doing what I thought I should do. She came in, one day she said, Duwayne, they're going to have a revival up there at that church at Davis. And I said, well, just tell the preacher that's fine with me if that's what he wants to do. Have a revival if they want to. Sarcastic. And she said, but I want you to go with me one night. And I said, woman, if you don't leave me alone about that deal, I'll never go to church. I didn't like her pushing. She did pretty good till Friday. Revival started on Sunday night and went through Sunday morning. Friday night she came. Friday day she came and she's talking to me. She said, I don't want to make you mad, but I need to talk to you about something. I said, what are you going to talk about? She said, church. I said, oh. She said, yeah. I said, but wait a minute, let me tell you what I'm thinking. Saturday night, I had some game roosters. Just some old dung hills that I fought over in Ardmore once in a while, and I was going to take those chickens to Ardmore to fight. And Sunday morning, she said, you'll have to go to Sunday school and church. Now, folks, I'm going to tell you that Sunday school and church, you're talking over 2 hours at this church with these people. And so I said, okay, you got me. That Friday night, I went with her. My Aunt Judy went. She's about this tall, weighed about 100 pounds, soaking wet. We got in the aisle, and that pew kind of to the back, and my wife went in first, then me, and then my Aunt Judy was sitting on the outside. And that preacher got up and started in on me. I'm telling you the facts of life. It was almost like someone told him I was going to be there. You know what he preached about? He preached about heaven and hell. The nerve of that man. When the invitation time came, that preacher went down front, and this evangelist, he's up there, y'all come down front and, get saved and all this and that. Well, I'm standing in the back, and I've got a hold of that pew as tight as I can hang on to it. Now, I'd done ruined my body. I was going to Oklahoma City. They were talking about cutting my stomach out because of my ulcers, because of the kind of life I was living. I weighed about 135 pounds, and I was sick. I couldn't even work and take care of my family. Listen, don't tell anybody, but if it wasn't for the commodities, I don't know what I'd have done to feed my family. But that cheese and that potted meat, how many of y'all remember that, to get that cheese and butter and potted meat? Yeah, I see some other poor folks here. I hung on the back of that pew and closed my eyes, and God's my witness. The tighter I closed my eyes, the more light seemed to be coming in. Just coming in, and I said to the light, I can't come down there like they want me to. My Aunt Judy writing away. 98 pounds soaking wet. I just kind of, something moved, I guess, and I I kind of looked, and when I looked, my Aunt Judy headed out down to the front. What kind of deal is that? Closed my eyes and hung on the back of the pew again. And that light was love. Real love. Love I'd never experienced. I don't remember my mama ever putting her arm around me and saying, Duwayne, I love you. My grandmother. The only one that ever told me that they loved me was that little green-eyed girl that I'd married. I hung on, and love was just flowing all over me. And I said, God, I know that's probably you. I'll do what you want me to do with my life if you'll do two things for me tonight. I didn't know you wasn't supposed to make deals with God. I said, God, if you'll heal my stomach so I can go back to work, take care of my family. And if you'll save my soul, I'll give you my life. All the results of a great Grandma Brown praying for me and a wife that cared. I tell you what, Brother Ed, it was like shackles just fell off of me all over. Love. I headed out of that pew and down to where the preacher was. He put his hand out and he said, Duwayne, what'd you come for? And I said, I came to tell you that I just got saved right back there. Right there. 24 years old. We've been back in Oklahoma from January to April. I got saved. We started going to church regularly. Church doors open. My family was there. There's never a question, Daddy, we're going today. You're going to get out pretty soon. As soon as that button materializes. Preacher got me to take a Sunday school class teaching 9 and 10-year-old boys. Man, that taught me a lot about Bible lessons that I'd probably never learned. See, God had a plan. But the more I did, it seemed like the less I was doing. And one night, 2 years after I became a Christian, I knew God was dealing with me somehow. And this meddling preacher came to the church in revival, and he said, now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and understood that they were unlearned and ignorant men, but they had been with Jesus. I've been hiding behind that. Unlearned and ignorant. I hadn't even gotten through the 9th grade in school. I had to quit school and start getting ready for my baby to come. When he said that, it hit me right in the heart. That night I went home, my wife, I didn't want to surprise her with anything at church. Got home, said, honey, come on, talk to you. She stepped in the bedroom. I said, I got to tell you, God's calling me to preach. And you know what she said, Jim? She said, I was wondering when you're going to figure that out. Wives really got away about them, don't they? I surrendered to the ministry at that revival. 6 months later, I was pastoring my first church. For 13 years, I pastored without an education. And I was just heartbroken because I wanted to be the best I could be for God. And then the opportunity came that I could go to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. I went over there on a 2-year program. It was the best 4 years of my life. Because I got saved. And because God called me to preach. One day I'm going to stand with my Grandma Brown, arm in arm, before the throne, and give him thanks for what she did in my life. Listen, folks, there's nothing happens in your life that God's not in control of. Even before I gave my life to Christ, God was orchestrating my life to get me to the place that I would do what He called me to do. I was fortunate enough to preach for 30 years. Pulpits. It's hard to keep a job, when you're a preacher. 6 churches. That's not funny. It is funny, but it's true. And it's harder today for a preacher than ever before, it seems. Where was I? 30 years in ministry, pastoring churches. Got out of seminary, went as a director of missions for 16 years. And now I'm working in my 53rd year of ministry. Little old skinny kid. I told my wife, my late wife, she passed away in 97, and I got a new one here that's just as wonderful as she was, if not more so. She compliments me, and she thinks I'm good looking and stuff, so. Was able to go, called to be a director of missions. Guys and gals, I believe that as much as a preacher is called to be a preacher, directors of missions are called to be directors of missions. Not all preachers are called. Not all director of missions are called. They just kind of move into that at times. Went down there for 16 years, and it is a wonderful, wonderful time. But I'm having the time of my life now. I'm able to go out and preach at different churches. Not often do I get to tell them about my life and what Christ did in my life. But I'm telling you, it doesn't matter if you're a drug addict, you're an alcoholic, you get kicked out of all the bars. My late wife said, well, you had to go to church. You already got kicked out of all the bars around here. I had so much anger, evidently. It built up in me because of the life that I had lived. And I would go in and have a few beers and more fights over the quarter on the pool table than anything else. I guess I was pretty good because I don't remember losing one. But I'm a winner in Christ. He has given me the most wonderful life I could ever ask for. You know, that Friday night I got saved. Let me close with this. That Friday night I got saved. I got up the next morning. I knew something had happened for sure in my vocabulary was changed immediately. You know, we become His workmanship in Christ, and He begins to chip away the ugly stuff. If He chipped it all away at once, we'd probably lay down and cry or something. But He takes it away a little. And the first thing He took was the dirty words out of my mouth. God's name in vain was part of my vocabulary. That bomb that they use all the time now was part of my vocabulary. But it was gone. It was gone. And I had to tell my Uncle Ray that he got saved last night over there at that church. We was working with that clay pipe, Orangeburg pipe they call it. And it put it in the ground for a sewer pipe. And he was running the backhoe, and I had a shovel, and you had to get just the right fall on it. I think it's 1/4 of an inch for 5 foot. Just the right fall on it. And I'm cleaning out that ditch that morning, that Saturday morning. And I look up, and it's after lunch. And I don't have that pain in my stomach anymore. It's gone. I haven't had it since. God heals people. And it doesn't take a faith healer, just prayers of a man that's desperate. That's desperate. And I was in a desperate situation. Don't wait until you're in a desperate situation to call on the name of the Lord. You call on Him now. You choose now the life that God intends for you to live When you give your life to Christ, He'll start working you towards what He wants you to be and how He wants you to be. And you don't have to be a smart man to get there. Just one that knows he's lost, on his way to hell, and he needs Jesus in his life. Friends, my God, our God, is an awesome God. And He can save your soul, and He can take care of any needs that you have in your personal life if you'll give your life to Him. Let's stand together.